I'm Neil Dubord, Chief of the Delta Police Department. This week on our show...
I went from being a leader of society to now I'm a drunk. And that's hard as a man to say. I've become useless while I'm still working as a firefighter.
Bend, don't break. This is a Delta Police podcast.
Hear more about how police officers strengthen their resiliency through the power of story.
All right, welcome back to Bend Don't Break, our podcast, and I'm really excited to be able to talk to another colleague and first responder in relation to firefighting again. And we've had one firefighter on the program before, and I'm thrilled now to have Erik Bjarnason with us to be able to join us and talk a little bit about his story and his struggle as he goes through. So Erik, welcome aboard here. We're thrilled to be able to have you here, and I always like to start off, first of all, what'd you have for breakfast today?
Well, it's funny. I was visiting my parents because they have HBO and we watch Game of Thrones. So I had to go all the way out to Mission to see them. But there's a place that is right next to a farm that has farm fresh eggs. So I grab a couple dozen of those every time I visit. So I had fresh eggs this morning.
Oh, well done. Actually, that's very good. Lots of protein and you're healthy. You're ready for today.
Yes.
Great. Well, I want to start off by sort of talking a little bit about your background, and you've just recently retired. So tell me where you retired from and what you've been doing.
I was a captain for North Van City Fire Department, and I was also with the North Shore Search and Rescue Team, which is a volunteer search and rescue team that goes up into the mountains. And I left them probably about 2 years ago, just because I'm getting too old and I wasn't being very useful.
Well, I know that the reputation of North Shore Search and Rescue is amazing. They do great work for us here in the Metro Vancouver area, and certainly we're very proud, I think, as a city to be able to recognize the work that they do.
Probably one of the greatest things I've ever done with my life was join that team. It has taught me immensely. It's introduced me to a great bunch of men and women. These people will drop everything to go help strangers week in, week out. And it's kind of nice to surround yourself with really positive people. And they are the most positive people I've ever met.
Oh, and we're going to learn from that today. So the purpose of our podcast is that we like to be able to share stories with people and share stories of resilience, share stories of challenge, and learn strategies on how people have overcome some of those challenges that they faced throughout their life. And you've got some amazing challenges. As I look upon you here, as we're sitting in this podcast, I see that you are missing all of your fingers and one thumb. And that you're working through that and worked as a firefighter for the last 12 years.
Exactly. What happened was, as a member of North Shore Rescue, every year somebody would have a climb somewhere in the world. We'd usually go down to Asia or, South America. And for our 40th anniversary, they wanted to do something special and get some notoriety for North Shore Rescue. And we did, not the right kind of notoriety, but we climbed Mount Logan, which is the second highest mountain in North America and by far the coldest. I did a dog sled trip up to the magnetic North Pole, and that was like a summer trip compared to Logan. It was so cold when you spit, it would freeze before it hit the ground. And we got hit by a subtropical cyclone, which is very, very rare, and we just happened to be at the worst possible place on the mountain. Took about 3 days for our buddies to get to us, and by then I'd frozen all my fingertips and half my thumb off. Luckily, we were able to get a high-altitude helicopter at Talkeetna, Alaska, and the American military to come help, just because on the Canadian side of the border, the biggest town's Haines Junction, which is about 800 people, and they didn't have the infrastructure for a high-altitude rescue. So we were incredibly lucky. They got us out in the eye of the storm, and it was actually a good buddy of mine, the leader of North Shore Rescue, who made it all happen, Tim Jones, who unfortunately passed away.
Know that name well, yes. Yeah, absolutely. So how many survivors? Tell me about how many people were stuck on the mountains and everyone survived?
All of us survived, which is unbelievable. We did radio our goodbyes. We gave our longitude, latitudes. None of us expected to live. When they got to us, we were basically unconscious zombies. 3 of us, there was Don Jardine, myself, and Alex, who's EHS. And all our tents got blown apart. All our packs got blown off the mountain. We ended up digging a snow grave. So basically a hole in the ground and laying there -90 for 3 days without food or water.
-90
in the wind chill.
I lived in Edmonton for a while, but there wasn't a -90.
That's a wind chill, but I've never ever felt cold like that, and I hope never ever to feel it again.
Now, certainly frostbite took your fingers. And what about your friends? Let's talk about your colleagues, first of all. Did they suffer any long-term results?
Well, we dug the snow grave, and I was the worst off, so I got to go on the bottom. And then Alex laid on top of me, and then Don laid on top of him. And so we're 3 deep, kind of like sardines in this grave. And Don's feet were sticking up about 2 inches. And unfortunately, they were above the lip of the grave, so they were getting hit by the wind. But we had one sleeping bag left. And so what he did is he wrapped the sleeping bag around his feet. He went to lean back, and a rogue gust of wind came and stole the sleeping bag out of his hands. So he lost all his toes. I lost all my fingers. And Alex, because he was getting heat from me and heat from the guy above him, he had nothing wrong, which we call him the golden boy. And everybody goes, well, why didn't you guys change spots? But it's impossible.
Unreal. Boy. And result of losing toes, still able to walk, still able to function reasonably?
Oh, he's fine. He says the only thing he can't do is wear sandals.
That's what makes it difficult to wear flip-flops. Yeah. No doubt about it. That's right. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So you're hauled off the mountain, and obviously you've got significant frostbite. How long are you in hospital?
Well, I was in the hospital just a couple days up in Alaska, and luckily they have the best frostbite hospital in the world. And we were taken there by the American military and then flown back to VGH, and I was in the burn ward probably 5 months. Just seemed like forever. It was a bit of a blur because I was on some pretty heavy painkillers, and it was quite the story at the time. So I was giving interviews, which I never should have done, because I was saying, of course, really dumb stuff, and of course that's the stuff that would make the air. Like this one interview, I sitting around the kitchen in the fire hall, we tease each other.
Yes.
And one of the things is there's always this contest between the firefighters and fire prevention. And the fire prevention is a fantastic job, and I have men and women that do it that I love. And they asked me, like, if you can't be a firefighter, are you going to go into fire prevention? Which is an honest, good question. But I was so stoned on painkillers. I go, if I have to go into fire prevention, I would have rather been left on the mountain. Oh. Which would have been really funny in the kitchen.
That's right.
But not over the news. And that insulted every fire prevention officer. So every time I see him, I have to, if they ever heard that interview, I said, I am so sorry. I didn't mean it. It's a fantastic job, and I have such respect for you.
Absolutely. Now, I know that your family were told that it was very grave when you got to the hospital. Can you tell me anything about that your situation was very grave and you may not make it?
Well, Tim Jones told my fire chief at the time, Barry Penman, that we probably wouldn't make it off the mountain. He decided to take that information and tell people that we were imminently going to die. So he phoned my parents and said that they should prepare for the funeral.
Wow. Okay. And obviously now you're trying to deal with that as well as trying to get yourself well.
Yeah. So that was a very traumatic phone call for him. So again, it was great news afterwards, but he should never have done that.
So you wanted to be a firefighter all your life?
Since I was a little kid.
Yeah, absolutely. And you met that dream, and obviously now you're working as a firefighter. You lose your fingers in sort of an expedition. And you also lose potentially the opportunity to be able to continue with search and rescue, North Shore Search and Rescue. What are you thinking? What's going through your mind?
Well, the search and rescue team is so fantastic. They made it clear, no matter what my injury, they'll find a place for me. If I can't do searches like I used to, I can be like a team lead where I can sit in the command van and organize. I can make phone calls. They were great. Like James Boyle would pull me aside and I'd say, what am I going to be able to do with my new hands? And he goes, well, that's going to be up to you. If you put the work in, you can do a great deal. If you don't put any work in, then you're going to be disabled. And I remember thinking, like, what can I do with these? And when they first amputated and I looked at them, I thought, oh my God, I can't do anything. And then I slowly started to realize, like, I could do everything I could do before. I do it differently. And like even a chainsaw, I'll hold it differently than I used to, but I can still do it. So that gave me hope, and that gave me something to work for. And actually, that's the best thing that could have happened to me is the firefighters were, again, openly hostile to me returning. So now I had to prove them wrong. So I worked 10 times harder than I probably should have. And that's one of the reasons why I came back to work so quickly. Especially in my mind, I wanted to feel normal again. I wanted to work. Like I remember them saying, well, why don't you just go on disability? You can go on disability the rest of your life. Well, I don't want to be on disability. I want to be a firefighter.
For me, obviously I'm looking at you as well here and thinking about how you would hold a chainsaw. I can just see those being challenges for you as you're starting to heal. Were there days that were very dark? Were there days that you thought, my goodness, I'm not in for this?
There was so many days I just wanted to quit. Like if I couldn't do something and the guys would laugh at me, that was really tough on me. So I got a tattoo when I took my daughter down to Mexico, and it's courage, and it's written so I read it, and then I used to look at that to remind me to have courage to keep trying, because there was days like when they'd give me some task, like I had to cut some metal over my head with a partner saw. No firefighter's ever asked to do that ever in the history of our department. Why they would test me with that is beyond me, especially since I'm an officer. I wouldn't even do it. I'd yell at the young guy to do it. But there's no reason for it. And I remember having such a hard time with it. Luckily, I was able to do it. But I remember thinking, oh my God, it's not that they're indifferent. They're trying to make me fail.
Yes. Where was your support coming from? Were you getting it from your family? Were you getting it from North Shore Search and Rescue? Whereabouts?
You hit it right on the head. That was my 2 PowerPoints. My family were unbelievable, supportive. I'm so lucky. Like I was born in such a loving home in Canada. So that's like 2 wins right there. North Shore Search and Rescue, they bent over backwards. Tim Jones was fantastic.
What did he do specifically that made it better? What, as a leader in an organization, and other leaders are obviously listening as well, we can learn from that to make sure that we are doing the right things for people that are trying to return to work.
He made me feel welcome. He made me feel needed. Like he said, like, no matter what, you're still a valued member of this team. So I was getting like all this positive from North Shore Rescue, which kind of can't be canceled out by all the negative from the fire hall, with them saying, well, obviously you can't do anything anymore, so why don't you just go away?
How quickly were you back in the fire hall?
My accident was May 28th, 2005, and I think I did my first call back around my birthday, March of the next year.
Okay, and in between that, when did you do your next expedition as such? Because I know that was about a year after as well, wasn't it?
That was June. And what it was is I really wanted to feel normal. Once I got back in the fire hall, that was a huge checked box. Now I wanted to climb again. Let me show you that I'm still strong. Let me show you that I'm still a team player, because climbing is much like being on a fire hose. There's 2 of you, back now there's 4 on a fire hose, but you're part of a team. Like if I'm a weak member, that climb is not going to go well. Just as if I'm a weak member at the fire hall, that fire will not go very well.
Yes. And when you returned to work, tell me a little bit about sort of how it was happening at the supper table. Tell me about your other colleagues.
Like the best I could hope for was indifference. There was a couple people that would tell me in private, oh, Eric, you did good, you've done okay, but nobody would ever say in public. And so when I'd walk into a room and everybody would stop talking and stare at me, you kind of get the feeling, well, you're not very welcome. And I unfortunately took that to heart, and I really started to isolate myself from my coworkers. And much like any first responder, like you're part of a team. If you're starting to isolate yourself, that's not good. And it can only get worse.
What did you do to overcome that?
I drank.
Okay. Tell me about that.
Well, I hit the bottle hard, self-medicated, quit everything I loved. Like I did Everest in 2009. I started drinking and I couldn't control it. Like on my 4 days off, like I shouldn't say I couldn't control it. I was actually super controlled because my cousin was killed by a drunk driver. So I would never drink and drive. And I wouldn't drink when I was at the fire hall or the night before the fire hall. But I'd get off at 8 a.m. and I'd have my 4 days off, and I would drink for like 3.5 days by myself, isolated in my room. And I knew how wrong that was. You know, I put on like 40, 50 pounds. In 2009, I climbed Everest to 28,000 feet. And now I'm probably weigh about 250 pounds. So you can tell that my health really suffered. And it got to a point where I knew that this was killing me. And I knew that it was actually isolated me even more at the fire hall. And it was just like taking its toll. And then there was an incident. Tim Jones, who I love dearly, like my mentor, my best friend, he passed away. But unfortunately, I was with him when he passed. So it was me and his daughter who had to do CPR on him. And it was a very, very traumatic experience because we were up in the mountains. It took about an hour for ambulance and help to get to us. And again, here's a man I love that I'm doing mouth to mouth with his daughter. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is so bad. But the chief at the time realized that, you know, this was a bad call, you know, take a couple days off. And I thought, that's really kind. Like, that's a first sense of kindness that I'd been shown by a chief. And I go, that's, you know, maybe things have come around. Maybe people realize that, you know, I'm suffering and I need help. So the guys I worked with thought it'd be funny to fill my locker full of CPR manuals. And I'm thinking, oh, really? Really? Like, that's not even funny.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So that was my rock bottom. And that's where I started drinking hard. So the worst is, and now I'm a captain. So I'm actually in charge of the shift. Well, I don't want to talk to these guys. So I'm hiding in my room. I'm ignoring my own shift. I see them as little as possible. So now the downward spiral continues. So I finally figured this out. If I don't change my life, I'm going to die. So I went and talked to the union, said I got issues drinking. And they go,
what changed it? What snapped? Tell me what it was. Was it one instant? Was it just finally you came? Was it Tim's death? Was it something else?
It was me realizing, like, the job that I loved, I now hated. The people that I'm supposed to take care of and be in charge of, I'm avoiding. And it's one of those things, like, when people phone you and you're always having an excuse why you don't want to go out anymore, they stop calling. And I'd realize that nobody ever calls me anymore. Well, duh. Yeah. And it's 100% my fault. Like, I could have reached out. I didn't. And I didn't like the route I was taking. So I went to my union and they went to City Hall and said, you know, Erik's got a problem. And, you know, a couple of questions were asked, like, how many 24-hour suspensions do I have? And, well, I don't have any. You know, how many drinking driving charges do I have? I don't have any. How much do you drink at work? I go, I've never have, never will. Well, then you don't really have a problem, do you? So everybody patted me on the back and said it was okay and, you know, keep a stiff upper lip. And then I went home and continued what I was doing. And
over those 3 days, what would you drink?
Whatever was available.
Is that right? So you'd go through a 26 quite easy?
Oh, easy. And it's so funny, too, because you wouldn't leave the house. Like, I remember thinking, waking up and going, oh, good, I don't have to do anything today. I got absolutely no reason to leave the house. And those were good days. And so eventually it got to the point, and I did getting some help, but that took probably about 6 years from the time I asked.
Wow. And how did you get that help? Who did you ask for to finally get that?
Well, it turned out that there's a couple organizations that were just starting out, and I got involved in what's called the resiliency program by fluke. Like all my climbs, I like to lead climbs. So my wife at the time, I was married, she was at a dinner party and they were talking about this Trevor Green, an American soldier that was hit in the head with an axe. And he wanted, they built him an exoskeleton and they wanted to take him to Everest Base Camp. And they were looking for someone to take him to Everest Base Camp. And so my wife at the time goes, well, my husband's been there. And they go, oh, you've been to base camp? No, he climbed it. So one thing led to another. And I ended up meeting Trevor Green and I was going to help him with his trip. And we were at a media event where they were showing off his exoskeleton. There was a gentleman sitting beside me. And he goes, you know, what do you do? And I told him, I'm a firefighter. He goes, well, I'm starting a new program. It's never been done before. We took it from Wounded Warriors. And what we do is we take people of the same kind of job, like not soldiers or firefighters or police or ambulance, and we'll put them in a room together as group therapy, but there's trained people that will kind of guide it so it doesn't go off in left field. And would that be something that would interest you? And I said, yes, please. And he goes, okay, well, this is the first group was going to be the next month. So I ended up going to that. And that at the time helped me unbelievably. And then I became a team leader. So I would come back as one of the not counselors, but just somebody that's been through it. Like
coach or mentor.
Yeah. So if a firefighter was too embarrassed to ask the counselor, then he'd come to me, or like the counselors wouldn't know firefighting terms. So they would come to me, and I did that for a while, and that really helped. And that actually kind of started me off on the getting healthy again. And then I found this group of bikers, and this group on paper looked unbelievable. It was exactly what I'm looking for. I love riding my Harley. Here's guys, and it was only firefighters, and it was mostly older firefighters. So guys that have retired, union, presidents, there was a couple chiefs in there, and it was called Florian's Knights. And we thought, this is exactly what I want. This bunch of guys that are firefighters. And what we would do is every week there'd be a charity ride somewhere that we'd go to, and we'd get together at least 2 or 3 times a week, and we would just support each other. We would raise money, and we would give it to this resiliency program and to other charities. And it was going great. And then a picture came out, and they say never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And all these accusations started flying, and it killed the club overnight.
It became quite controversial.
Oh, huge. Yeah, I had to talk to everybody and say, no, that's not what we were about. And I ended up everybody ended up kind of, the gang, the club, it was a riding club, basically dissipated overnight just from the one article. And it was just such a shame, because that really got me off drinking, because when I won't drink and drive, and if I'm on my bike like 3 or 4 times a week, that's 3 or 4 days a week that I couldn't drink. Then the other days I didn't have the desire. So it actually was helping me and was getting me out socially. Now I'm not trapped in my room. And that's one of the worst things you can do is isolate, because then nobody really knows you're in trouble until it's too late. And then by then it's so hard to bring it back to, the light side.
Yes. Now, are you still friends with some people in that group?
Oh, yeah. Like, we still do what we did before. We still go ride. We still go for lunch. We took off our vests because that seemed to be the thing that bothered everybody. And now we just ride. And one of the things I love about riding is when you ride, the only thing you think about is riding.
I sort of want to talk a little bit about what that picture was, and to make sure our listening audience has an appreciation about it. And maybe you can just explain what the picture was that caused so much grief.
Well, what it is, every weekend we would go on a charity ride. And one of our guys grew up in East Van. He grew up with a bunch of guys, and he went one way and they went the other. So everybody was sitting around, and they were all wearing their vests. And he had his picture taken with a guy he grew up with, not thinking that anybody would care. And he's wearing his vest. The other guy was wearing his vest, and people cared.
So the accusation was that the fact that this motorcycle club of firefighters and associated people were now associating with other particular motorcycle gangs.
And people were asking me, I go, really, you think I'm going to start my criminal career? I'm 53, overweight, and I got no hands, and now I'm going to become a criminal.
Oh, goodness. Well, at least you got a sense of humor. That's right. Yeah, I gather that picture was published in the paper, and that's sort of where it took off and had legs.
Oh, yeah. And it's like I said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And people love that kind of drama. Here's these great guys, but no, they're not good guys. They're actually bad guys, and, knock them off their pedestal. And unfortunately, nobody ever talked to me about it. I wish they had. I wish they'd called me and said, why did you join the club? What did you get out of it? And I would have told them, I got so much out of it. I got to be social again. I got to raise money for good charities. And I'm sorry this picture was taken. I wasn't even there.
Anything that when you were there that you saw was nefarious at all?
No, the biker community, it's funny. When you walk in, I don't know if it's a rule or not, but you have to walk up to every single person and shake their hand. And when you leave, you do the exact same thing. It was very social. I think just to make sure that there was no bad blood between anybody. But the riding, you're just riding.
Yeah, there is no. So the club folds, you keep the association with the people, so you continue to ride. And we've heard from others that have done these podcasts before that when they get on their bike, it's a release. It's an opportunity for them to be able to relieve some of their stress. Sergeant Ray Atwell talked about the fact that how he enjoys sort of getting out on the road and just riding.
Well, one of the things that happened about this association, they were doing a documentary on firefighters and PTSD. And so the biker group that I belonged to was just one of these sub-chapters in it. And one of the other chapters is these scientists who have been studying the human brain and what happens to it when you ride. And it's much like the meditation state.
You know, I want to sort of build on that. So you have been able to get some help from the Resiliency Project in relation to your drinking. You've now become less isolated than you were before. You have sort of some colleagues that you're riding with. Then you're finding a good release, a good way to be able to release. Then what happens is that you need something developed for your hand.
Well, again, another just fluke, but a buddy of mine sent me a link on Facebook, and it was about this new company called Naked Prosthetics. And what they do is they build these contraptions, but it allows you to have your hand back. So they built one for me, and again, you know, thank God. So all of a sudden, after all these years, I can use my left hand again. So I've been working with that company, and I've been going around talking to doctors and hand therapists and showing them how it works, because it's brand new in Canada. Nobody knows it's out there. So that's, again, has allowed me. And that gives me a purpose, because I think everybody needs to have a purpose. Like when I got injured the first time, they said, go on disability. Well, you know, if I had gone on disability, I would have been dead by now. I would have drank myself to death. And now I have a purpose. Now I can help people that are missing fingers.
Absolutely. And what I'm looking at here is looks like a Terminator hand, kind of. That's exactly what it looks like. It's full of metal and a little bit of rubber on the tips, and it looks pretty impressive. We've had actually Eric take it off because what he was doing, he was tapping on the table beforehand, so you were hearing it. So it's sitting in front of me right now, if you can imagine that, as we look at this contraption. I don't really even know what to call it, but it sure looks like it works.
Oh, it's fantastic. It works unbelievable. But it gives me something to do. Now I can go out into society and again be useful. I still help out with North Shore Rescue for like fundraising and stuff. I still like doing the bike rides for charities. And so now, as long as you surround yourself with good, decent people and do good, decent things, I think it just like lifts you up. Instead of isolating yourself, which just drags you down.
So you have great understanding of sort of self-reflection, you know, from what I hear of you. I can't imagine you during those dark days when, in fact, you were drinking. And like, I can't see you, knowing what I see of you now, how reflective you are and how thoughtful you are, that you wouldn't have had those same kind of, that same thoughtfulness back then.
I did, but I was so full of shame, embarrassment. Like I went from being like a leader of society to now I'm a drunk. And that's hard as a man to say, like I've become useless.
Yes.
While I'm still working as a firefighter. And that was hard too, because I'd go to work and I didn't feel like I was a good firefighter. I wasn't in shape anymore. I didn't take care of myself. And it really had to hit rock bottom for me to say, like, this is not the way I want to go out. This is not the way I want to be remembered. You know, I have to do something. Nobody's going to help me. Nobody's going to force it on me. This is something I have to do myself and take responsibility for my own actions.
Good for you. And that we often hear that, I have to say, is that all these people that we've talked to in the podcast come to this realization that they own it. And at one point in time, they want to be the victor, not the victim. And they want to be able to say, you know, I'm going to take responsibility for my own life and I'm going to overcome this. And when they do that, the whole world changes.
Oh, yeah. It gives you something to drive for.
Absolutely. So I want to sort of bring us to, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left, and I want to bring us to a conclusion here today and hear the finish of your story. So you've recently retired.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, after a little over 30 years, and we have such a good pension plan, and I had 6 years as a captain, so my pension wasn't going to get any more. And I wasn't a great firefighter anymore. I wasn't a good leader. So I figured I'm going to leave and I'm going to start something new and be good at that.
And what are you doing now?
I work for the prosthetic company. I'm a hand model, if you want, for lack of a better term.
As I'm looking at this guy with knuckles. Yeah, that's right.
And I go around with them and I talk to people and just let them know, like talk to a lot of surgeons, because now they know this product's out there. So after they amputate somebody's hands, they can say, oh, by the way, go take a look at this and see if this is a good fit for you. With that, then I still do a little bit with North Shore Rescue. I love that. Like, again, like that's probably the greatest thing I've ever done in my life was join that team. And, I would suggest to anybody to join their local search and rescue team.
Absolutely. So here's what I've heard you say today. So correct me if I'm wrong, is that number one, I think as leaders in organizations, I heard you hear loud and clear that we need to make sure that our members feel valued and they know that we care for them.
Exactly.
That's so important. They need to hear that support, and that needs to be overt. It just can't be, a pat on the back and thanks for coming back, but it needs to be a strong message of support. So I'm certainly taking that away, but I've heard you say other things that I think that are common that I want to bring up is, number one, you have to find a way to be able to relieve some of that stress, and your way was to be able to get on your bike and to ride your bike and just let everything go. And as you said, when you're riding your bike, you were just riding your bike. Absolutely. The second thing I think was important is that you've got to try not to isolate yourself. Although that's hard because that's what you want to do naturally, is that you want to try your very best not to isolate yourself, because when that happens, nothing good happens. When
you isolate, you self-medicate, and that never ends well.
Absolutely. The next thing is I heard you say is that you need to have a purpose. Having a purpose makes all the difference in the world. And any comments on that?
Well, exactly. Like if you're just kind of wandering through life, not doing anything useful, you're not going to feel useful. Again, it'll drag you down. Like if you wake up in the morning and you go, I got to do this, this, and this, and it's going to benefit this person, that person, then you wake up and you feel great about yourself. Like that was what helped me was not the resiliency program so much, but the fact that they asked me to come back as a team lead and help other people. And that's, exactly what I needed at the time.
Absolutely. And finally, I heard you say something that you've got to own it at the end of the day. You've got to take responsibility for yourself. You have to be able to recognize that you're the only one that's going to be able to haul yourself out of the dark days. And once you do that, things begin to change day by day and inch by inch, but they do begin to change.
Oh yeah, if you hate somebody and you blame them for all your problems, for one, they don't care. And it's not going to benefit you whatsoever. So why not say, okay, well, this happened to me. What am I going to do about it? And is that going to be a positive or a negative thing in my life? And like for a while, you'll pick the negative just because it's the easy way out and it's self-numbing. But eventually, when you start picking the positive, like it'll get better. And there's so many people out there. You're not alone. That's one of the other things I learned out is this is a normal reaction to abnormal situations.
Absolutely. We are never alone. And sometimes we think we are, but many other people are feeling some of the same thoughts you were.
Exactly.
Before I invite Aaron in to sort of help us conclude here, I want to be able to just say what I think. Number one is that you are here, you're thoughtful, you're a problem solver, you take responsibility for yourself. I see fire in your eyes, and certainly I see your magic hand here as well. That's right. But I've got to thank you for your openness, your transparency, and just the level of ability to articulate how you overcame some of these situations. And I am grateful for your being able to agree to come on our podcast.
Well, I want to thank you for doing the podcast, because if this was available for me 10 years ago to listen to this kind of thing, like I think I probably would have skipped a lot of the negative in my life. And there's so many people like you out here that are the tip of the sword. They're actually realizing that there is a real problem with PTSD. There's a real problem with depression and self-medication with all first responders. And let's do something to change it before it gets to be such an issue that the person's off on stress leave or, unfortunately, some have taken their own lives.
Absolutely. Aaron, why don't you join us here for a second? Well, Aaron, as you know, is one of the creators for this podcast, and he's had great involvement, and he enjoys sitting in each and every one of them as he can relate to some of the stories that he hears. So, Aaron.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to start off. I appreciate you pulling me in. I'm just going to preface that I actually just came in for about the last 5 minutes because I've duties called. And so I can paint the picture. I'm coming into a room with Erik, the chief, and there's a black table, and I see this prosthetic hand, as you refer to as the Terminator hand, and a pair of Terminator glasses, and I'm thinking, what is going on here? But the one thing that I just even in the few minutes that I was listening to you talk, Erik, is I can really appreciate is about the purpose, and I think that's super important to have as simple as even just getting out of bed that day when you're definitely getting to the, I don't want to say rock bottom, but getting down into the nitty gritty and having that purpose and getting out of bed, whether it's making your bed or just something, and those baby steps kind of getting you moving and proceeding towards that healthier path, I guess. So that's a really great point, I think. And that was one of the big things for me as well, is having purpose.
Well, one of the things we were talking about before you got here is like some days, like were the happiest days were when I didn't have to do anything because I knew all I had to do is get out of bed and eat. Yeah. And that's no life.
No, you're right. No.
Well, Erik, before you go here, I'm going to give you what I typically give most of the people that appear on the podcast. And this is what we call our commitment coin for the Delta Police Department. And it speaks to your commitment to the community, your commitment to making it better for first responders. And what we have on the front of it is obviously our badge with our values on it. But on the back is a tribute to our 2 fallen officers that we've had in the Delta Police Department. And then, of course, inside the box is a little bit of the card about the commitment coin. So it's my pleasure to be able to present this to you today, and thank you so much for
being thank you. So that's a beautiful coin. Now I'm a bit jealous. The firefighter coins are kind of ugly compared to
Well, there always is that friendly banter between fire and police. So I just want to formally conclude. Thank you so much for being here. We know that it's time out of your schedule, and I know that you're on tour with your hand, so it's very cool.
Well, it's close to come to being a rock star.
And I've definitely taken away some learning from you today, so I'm grateful for that, and I'm hopeful our listeners will have the same kind of value that I've seen from our conversation.
And again, thank you for doing this, and for the listeners, like if you are suffering, and even if you're at the beginning of it, reach out. There's somebody out there that will help you.
Absolutely, couldn't said it better myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
These productions never come without a lot of work from everyone involved. A big shout out and thank you to Constable Aaron Hill, Melissa Granum, and Nikki Hewitt for producing and recording, and of course post-production done by Podfly. Next week on Bend, Don't Break.
When I was sitting there and I've got all my friends on scene and I am leaning against Shannon and I'm going into that all the black spots in your eyes, and I think I'm dying. Like I'm sitting there just thinking, like which one of these wonderful people, one of my teammates, is gonna have to go tell my mom that I died in the line of duty. I'm 24 years old and this is it.
For more episodes, you can find us on iTunes and Google Play. If you have a story to tell, go to deltapolice.ca/podcast to submit your idea. Don't forget to subscribe to and rate our podcast. And if you want to connect, we're on all major social media platforms. Once again, thanks for tuning in.